elephants and its supporters, but they need your help now more than ever. I'm here with Duncan McNair, CEO, founder of STAE. Duncan, congratulations on this enormous victory to get this law, this animal welfare law, passed. But we happen to know that you need a lot of help and support now. Can you tell us exactly, for the listeners that do not know, what exactly is the Animal Low Welfare Activities Act?
Okay, Lindsay. Well, thanks very much indeed for that introduction and for inviting me on. And hello to all your viewers. It's great that you were able to come and listen to this. So the Animals Low Welfare Activities Abroad Act, it's a pretty clunky title. But the essence of this is to operate a ban in England and Northern Ireland at the moment. It'll soon, we hope, become the whole of the UK, a ban on the advertising and offering for sale within the UK of any overseas practice that abuses any vertebrate species. That includes the poor elephants, it includes big cats, all the primate family, monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, avian life, but any kind of birds, ostriches, birds of paradise, and so on. Marine life that's vertebrate, donkeys, horses, bears, camels, and many more species. All of those activities that advertise places where these animals are abused, whether openly or otherwise, are now to be banned from advertising and sale in the UK. That is a very, very big and important law with huge implications. The ultimate purpose is to steer the market from totally unregulated, brutal and abusive towards ethical tourism, towards genuine sanctuaries and wildlife reserves where these precious, often always endangered and always vulnerable animals can be observed at a safe and respectful distance, safe for humans and respectful to the animals. That would be a sea change from the decades, in some respects centuries, of abuse to all these animals so far that's brought so many of them towards the brink of extinction. And these are some images, some sad, some.
Yes, these are some of the elephants that have gone to sanctuary. And then, of course, we show some of the breaking of the spirit Pajan photos here. Duncan, why don't you talk a little bit right off the bat about what your needs are going forward here, because we'll go back a little bit more into the whole story. But for those that may not stay on as long, what do you need now? You've gotten this far. What do you need now?
Okay, well, this law requires now our relevant government minister to draw up a list of all those horrible activities that must be included in this new act. He is going to be consulting with stakeholders, above all with the animal welfare lobby, and as well as with those who are not interested in helping animals, a great deal of the unscrupulous travel industry, some circuses, zoos, aquaria, and so on. And we need help from our friends in the US to email us at Save the Asian Elephants with their own expertise on what activities relating to what species they say should be banned from advertising under this new act. And it could include any vertebrate species at all. And the reason we reach out to our friends in the US is because you will have great experience that we don't necessarily always have of many of the activities that are abusive, that affect vertebrate species. So we're doing this to particularly the US, but to across the world, Australasia, across Europe, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe and elsewhere. But America is very important. It has a huge market in tourism. It, of course, has an enormous population with heavy and important buying power. And so the first thing above all else is we need your help by contacting us. You can email us at the email that appears on the screen, savetheasianelephants@stae.org, or you can go on our website, stae.org. And you can contact us with your own, simply with a request for the questionnaire, and we will ensure that you get it straight back to complete. It's very simple, but it requests you to identify the species you can speak for, the activities you think should be forbidden and why, and any other information. That's essentially it. That is our first big ask, and we're holding the option open to do that for at least another month. But please do help us. Include links if you wish. The other thing is to generally support STAE. I've got to say that we have run a very, very intense campaign for 9 years. We're quite a small group, although we have attracted now tens of millions of followers, the biggest petition in world history for any animal species. But we are very, very depleted in funds. And to carry on our work, which is going to involve huge further lobbying with government, we desperately need financial support. We are so grateful if you can help us, whatever size of contribution you can make. None of us take any pay. We all work for free. We're all volunteers. I put a huge amount of my own money in, but no charity really should be predicated on one person's wallet. And now is the time we need help. And if you can donate to us, we are extremely grateful. We will acknowledge that. And if you want to speak to us, I'm delighted. Do look at what we've done. We were named amongst the 10 greatest charities in the world earlier this year for the impact of our elephant work. And I'm very proud of that because it helps to elevate into the public consciousness this desperate cause to save so many animals now from imminent extinction. So thank you for anything you can do for us and our work.
Yes, I have the website up right here for you folks, where you can see it right at the top. There's a donate button. And also, as Duncan said, it's very important for you to help and take action as well on this particular law, to be sure that the people that are perpetrating these atrocious acts are stopped, because they will be very, very strong lobbyists, and they will be able many times to overturn. We've seen that in the US with a Prop 12. It's still not being enacted because the public pressure was not there.
That's
Duncan,
it.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that, I've indicated that this law is important because it stands to protect and perhaps save so many beleaguered species. But also it's a law that can be adopted in any country. The underlying measures are suitable to be adopted in any country that has an unscrupulous market in animal tourism. And, America's a great country, but it does have these problems, as we do in the UK, abusive tourism advertising of animals. So, the US, but many other countries have this sort of market. And that's why this law is important, because it's not just a law that can apply to the UK. It can and should apply to any country in the world that has abusive animal tourism running along. It's a huge industry. It is so brutal. I've seen baby elephants, beaten, stabbed, screaming and crying in front of their mothers to break their spirits for easy use in tourism. But I
want to get into all of that in a moment, but okay. I did have a question I wanted to ask you about, or just to really bring out the point of how people going on these trips abroad, I'm sure, are very concerned, and without naming the names of these big companies because we cannot reach them to reply. In a broad sense, can you explain what to look out for? Because we want this stopped immediately.
Okay. Well, first of all, we hope if this law takes real hold, that these places will wither and die, and they'll be replaced only by genuine sanctuaries and wildlife reserves and ethical tourism. But in the meantime, let's say take Asian elephants. So any venue that permits direct physical contact with the elephant, generally with almost any animal, is to be avoided. These are wild creatures. They do not expect or permit being ridden, being washed, having selfies, having people clambering over them, forcing them to play football and paint and dance and stand on top of each other. And it means they've been brutalized into submission. This is an example of the brutality you see here, this poor trussed up elephant that will be stabbed and beaten while it's tethered and tied up like this, and often kept there for months and years in great distress and pain and anxiety. And people don't realize that, for example, elephant riding is brutally wrong. They think, well, an elephant's huge, we're small, what's the problem riding it? That's not the point. Well, indeed, elephants have very weak backs, as a matter of fact. They're not made for heavy downward weight, and they have along their spine many upward pointing bones that are put into agony if a heavy weight is placed on top of them, like a huge iron throne with 5 or 6 tourists on top. But moreover, elephants are wild animals. You can't walk up to a wild tiger or lion and hop on its back without consequences. Similarly with elephants, unless they have been severely brutalized almost to death, so as to be terrified into a position of submission so that they obey anything. And that's exactly what happens to Asian elephants. So the short point is, it's wrong to do these activities. You will see, if you look closely, that elephants that are submissive in the sense of admitting people for rides and for forced endless washing, scrubbing away their precious skin, which protects them, playing football, they all of them will have been subject to extreme brutality in this day and age. In hundreds of years gone by, it was different. That because of their great cognitive abilities, elephants were able to learn over a period of years and not be brutalized, even though it's wrong to bring them into captivity to be alone and so on, away from their herds in their natural state. But nonetheless, now we see these are the instruments of torture used daily. This is the bull hook or ankus, which has got a fierce hook and a spike to stab and rip elephants, usually babies, in all their most sensitive parts, even to pull their eyes out and things.
Oh my God.
All of that. Here is a cage, a crushing cage, in which the young elephant is forced in a horrible, chaotic situation. That's gradually closed in on it, and the poor elephant is left terrified for weeks, and then it's stabbed, beaten, hammered with planks, often screaming upside down in agony and fear. And they go out, they are brought out of their minds. They would not recognize their mother at the end of that. They're in a terrible, broken down state where they will do anything because they remember with great fear the brutality visited on them as young elephants. People need to realize that's what they're buying into when they pay money to ride an elephant or to play with it, or to be pulled up on its trunk to its back, or to watch it playing football, darts, painting, tricycling, and so on. People must get wise to this. We won't see, your children and grandchildren will never see an elephant in the wild if this continues, and you won't see an elephant at all after 50 or 100 years if this continues.
Absolutely.
So that's elephants. That I could tell you the horrors for so many other species that have echoes of what happens to elephants of all sorts.
Talk a little bit, perhaps, for a moment or two about how they get the selfies with the tigers, and what are those species go through?
Well, first of all, tigers are on the very, very brink of extinction. I don't know if you know, but there are more tigers in private hands in the US than there are in the whole of the world in the wild.
I didn't know that.
And they are hideously abused in captivity in the US, but beyond. The answer is that about selfies with tigers is that they're grabbed from the wild. It's a tragedy. They can't breed in captivity. They have their claws removed or often ripped out, their teeth ripped out. They're heavily drugged. They often put loads of Vaseline grease in their eyes so that their vision is blurred. They are somnolent, and they are just used to throw across people's laps for photos, for fun photos. So just a few seconds of tourism fun is a lifetime of horrors for these poor, precious, beautiful tigers. So there it is in a nutshell for tigers. And you know, there are so many horrors that we know of for tigers. I'm afraid some in the US, but enormously so across Southeast Asia, where they are still clinging on as an indigenous species. You know, the other big cats similarly are treated like that. I could tell you horrors for cetaceans like dolphins and orcas in minuscule pools where they have nowhere to go. They're forced to do all sorts of things daily. They come in contact with people's hands that are covered in grease and perfumes and rings that rip their skin and all sorts of things. You know, they are confined in spaces 1/200,000th as small as their natural state in the wild, and they don't live very long. All these animals have limited lifespans, and tragic ones once brought into brutal captivity for tourism exploitation.
Yes, I wanted to go back a little bit, Duncan. You've been working on this bill now for what, like 9 years, I believe?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's kind of on a more pleasant note, the fact that you got the support of King Charles, that he signed
Yeah.
almost immediately. Could you maybe touch on
Yeah.
that a moment?
Yeah, that was an extraordinary sort of denouement climax to the whole parliamentary journey of this bill. This bill actually arose out of a draft I prepared 5 years ago at the request of a senior government minister, Lord Goldsmith, and we pressed hard for it to stay, and then it disappeared. But it came back at the beginning of this year, 2023, after numerous meetings I and my team had at the Prime Minister's house at 10 Downing Street, as a bill not just for elephants, but for all vertebrate species. And it went at great speed through all stages of our House of Commons, which is sort of the equivalent of your Congress, and then all stages in the House of Lords, which is roughly like your Senate, the upper house. And then it got to the final reading in the House of Lords, and that passed again without any opposition, no opposition at any stage to this bill. And then 2 hours later, the King, who normally it takes months, at least months, for the King's royal assent to make a bill law in England, but here it happened within 2 hours, and we found that out the next day. It was absolutely extraordinary and wonderful. And we know our King has a great heart, a huge heart with his family for animal welfare issues. He has a wonderful record in so many ways. And we hope, we don't know, that he was following the course of this enactment through Parliament, and was ready, waiting, and perhaps hoping that it would pass. And so he signed it with remarkable rapidity. I was amazed. I'm a lawyer by profession. I've seen the course of parliamentary enactments going through both houses. I have never seen anything like this. And we hope, we don't know, but we hope and believe that he had his eye on this and that he loved the idea of this bill, that he saw that it had all party support. He saw that the country was absolutely full square behind it. You know, polls show well over 95% of Britons support this bill. And he signed it immediately. We above all, Lindsay, we hope that demonstration of immediate support by the King will encourage our government to make sure they do now implement the provisions of this act in a timely, immediate way. They don't let it slide. And that's where the support of our friends in the US and beyond is critical now, that we need your support because we need your expertise and input. And bear in mind, if you send us details of abuse of animals, vertebrate animals, supported by your evidence of animals abused in tourism, wherever it is in the world, in the US or beyond, you are helping to lay the ground for such legislation to happen in your country as well. This is a bill and enactment measures that are not just good for our country, but should and must, really, for the sake of the animals, be echoed and adopted in the US and in all other countries that allow this brutal animal tourism to be advertised.
Yes, I'd like you to go over now, if you would. I think you have three main points that this law will benefits of this law, and one of them was to make it the norm that this sort of activity is not allowed worldwide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
go
that's
through
it.
those if you
Okay.
would.
Well, I think the first one I touched on, which is that
Yeah.
it is a law not just for one species, but for every vertebrate species. And I touched on those briefly, but it affects elephants, yes, but all species of elephants. It affects big cats, as I said, primates, bears, dolphins, orcas, other marine life, all avian life, including exotic birds, ostriches, equines of all sorts, donkeys, horses, mules, camels, bulls, numerous other species. That's the first way in which
Wow.
this law is important. Okay, it stands to, and this is nothing like a full list. This is some of the obvious species that it stands to help. Secondly, it's important, as I touched on, because it's a law whose measures are so obviously capable of being emulated, of adopted in other countries across the world. So it's not a law that ends at the shores of the British Isles. It's where it starts, and it's where it should spread from. I've addressed the European Parliament 2 or 3 times. They are all very interested. They wanted to see whether this law would pass in the UK before they started looking closely at similar measures themselves. Well, we have passed that law. We are working hard at Save the Asian Elephants with our friends in the animal sector and beyond to implement it. And we hope Europe and the rest of the countries in the world who care about the survival of these ancient species will follow in step. Thirdly, and in a way most importantly, this law offers the prospect that the measures it implements will help stimulate debate and discussion about our very relationship with all the other species in the world. For the first time in history, in recent centuries, in recent millennia, one species has had in the palm of its hand the prospects for survival of all other species. Humankind has caused the extinction in the last 100 years alone of well over 1 million species. 1 million species. And we threaten many million more species, including all of those that I've mentioned. All of them can be regarded as being in some sort of peril to differing degrees. And so this law, I wouldn't want to attend a dinner party where people laugh and joke about having had an elephant ride on holiday. I would like it to be known that just as people used to laugh about having another drink or two before they set off from a party, driving off, which used to be a joke, now it's taken as a very serious transgression of social norms. So the abuse of animals, often unwittingly, in tourism should be a no-no. It should be an area we don't laugh and joke about anymore, but that we decry, that we criticize, and that we ostracize. And I think that, as a lawyer, I do believe that the law has real potential to change social attitudes and norms. And this is certainly an example. People don't know about the abuse of elephants in tourism, to take one, again, totemic species. But they certainly don't know about, for example, the horrors, let's say, to ostriches being forcibly ridden, having their backs broken by a huge fat man riding them, throttling their necks with leads as they ride them, and breaking their back. So the last for the ostrich is coughing up blood, choking to death in the sand. And many other species of which I can tell you unspeakable horrors. All of these things people should know about. And then they must decide, are we happy with that? Are we happy for a very small number of people and companies to make endless money out of the final days of these precious creatures who are the legacy of our planet and our inheritance that we should be cherishing and preserving and protecting? Or do we just screw money out of them till their last ounce of blood and pain?
Yes, that's That's so true. We have to really wake up. But also, let's touch on, and this is, you have a documentary, Road to Nanush, which you have made, and it's won a lot of recognition and so forth. But that covers the human crisis that happens with elephant riding. Maybe we should touch on that, because we haven't touched on that.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, we a year ago I visited Thailand again, and I visited a particular venue which I was keen to see. It's called Nong Nooch Village Garden in northern Thailand, in Chiang Mai. I went there because my organization, Save the Asian Elephants, has been working with a woman who, when she was about 20, some 20 years ago, was sitting with her sister of about the same age and her father in the front row of a rodeo at Nong Nooch, where they had a huge, every day they had and have a huge rodeo show of elephants, babies and adults. And a mighty tusker elephant was about 10 meters away from them. And like all the elephants there, including the babies, it was being routinely stabbed and having, for example, the babies having nails stuck into pressed by thumb into their necks discreetly to terrify them, to make them do tricks and so on. Anyway, this huge tusker elephant, you've got no idea how massive they are. It was about 10 meters from the small group of three, and it was stabbed one time too many. Its eyes rolled and it charged the group, and it thrust its tusks several times through the chest of this girl's sister, Andrea. And Andrea died in the arms of her sister, Helen, 2 or 3 hours later. And the horror of that story was not that it's unusual, but that it's commonplace. There are deaths happening all over the place every day, pretty much, to tourists and others who are placed in close proximity to Asian elephants in captivity, who are routinely hideously abused and tortured. They are deadly dangerous. They're not tamed. They are suppressed by terror into doing things. That's very different from being tamed like a dog or a horse. And that place today, 20 years later, is far worse than it was even then.
No.
And in England alone, there are 121 companies presently advertising that particular venue. So that's the result of total non-regulation before this law starts to be effective, this new law. And we want people to look at that place and realize what a disgusting, unethical, brutal place it is. Catastrophic for elephants and indeed tigers, which are hideously abused there also, and deadly dangerous for tourists. Deadly dangerous. We have no doubt many people have been killed at places exactly like that. I was shocked to see hundreds of school children milling around that rodeo, leaning on the very fence with the elephant the other side. And the idea was that the elephant would be brought right up to them with its enormous tusks swaying over their heads. And the idea was that it would reach out its trunk for the children to place great wads of rolled up cash into its trunk, which it was then trained to pass back to its handler. It's all about the extraction of money at the expense of the elephants, and often at the deadly, deadly danger and expense of humans, including human children. So a grossly disgusting and unethical place, Nong Nooch. But STAE, my organization, has identified, wait for it, 1,212 venues so far identified across the world that are promoting these sorts of disgusting elephant abuses. That's over 1,200 that just we have identified just for elephants. There are many, many more venues that specialize in the abuse of other creatures, crocodiles, reptiles of all sorts, and birds, horses, great apes, and big cats, and so on. Thousands and thousands and thousands of these venues. And so this this Nong Nooch, and if you go to our website or ask me, I can send you the clip of the documentary that Lindsay just mentioned. This points to just an example of everything that is wrong with the current situation of rampant exploitation, reckless exploitation of precious, vulnerable, endangered animals, and of course bringing into deadly danger all humans within proximity as well. What a way to go, and what a tragedy if these are to be amongst the last of these ancient species that we will ever see.
Let's watch a little short clip of a news story from Great Britain that you did.
The sad life story of an Asian elephant in tourism is as a baby to be snatched from the wild illegally. The mother usually killed in front of it, who tries to protect it, and other herd members also killed for that reason. The baby is taken away, isolated, which is a disaster, and then it is starved and dehydrated, kept awake with massive noise, and then stabbed, ripped, beaten, and yelled at for weeks on end sometimes.
Now, some of the images we have on the screen, if you're watching on TV, you can see it. If you're listening on radio, make sure you check out around about 9 minutes after 5 o'clock. The image that we're seeing there, this is an image of somebody being cruel to the elephant?
It is. It's an image of actually someone training an elephant. It's so-called pujan, the breaking of the spirits. Now, it comes in many ghastly forms, and these images show just some of them. And this shows the result of an elephant performing in a horrible circus-type arena. This is ubiquitous. This happens every day, all the time. The stick you see there with the fierce spike is a so-called ankus or bullhook, which is used constantly by those who control the elephants, the mahouts, to get them to obey.
I don't think people have any idea what's going on. And I wonder, Duncan, this is in England, you did this story, but what about in the US? Have you been able to get onto mainstream media in the US or any other countries to talk about this?
Well, not yet. We're very keen to. It's not for want of wishing to. We've been so busy with the UK media. We would love an outlet in the States for all the reasons that I've discussed with you. And if any of your viewers are in the media or have access to it, that would give us a bigger space to address our campaign, we would be delighted. Please contact us through the website or by direct email or social media. Ironically, amongst that sequence of images that you showed on that clip, that little baby elephant spread-eagled on the ground, that happened in the US. That was not in deepest India or something. That was in the US. These disgusting practices. I'm not making any apologies for what happens in the UK, by the way, to animals. Absolutely not. Except that we have largely driven live animals out of our circuses, at least. But I'm afraid this is very widespread, and it seems to go unchallenged so often. I mean, there are great groups in the States that we hugely admire for the work they do, but there's far too much of it. And I know the animal abuse lobby is a massively powerful and well-resourced one that is so unscrupulous. But I'm afraid, this maybe this explains the ongoing abuse of these poor creatures everywhere. The short answer is that we believe that the people of the US, as everywhere across the world, at bottom, they are concerned for the survival of these ancient species. They really are. And they want to take steps. It's not always obvious what needs to be done, but we are all complicit in this. And we must all take action now, because the poor elephants, all these other species, many of them don't have long, quite aside from the fact, as we speak, they are suffering grievously. It's very sad that many of these species now are almost as numerous in brutal captivity as they are in the wild, and in some cases more so. But there are getting towards now being almost as many Asian elephants in captivity as in the wild. That's a very, very unhealthy state of affairs. They can't breed in captivity. They're often forcibly, if I can use the word, raped, to try to get them to to breed, but it normally doesn't work. It's massively traumatic, as you can imagine. I've seen much video of it. It's just awful. So you know, it's a chaotic scene. This law in the UK is a starting point. It's a really big step on the journey. It's not a magic wand that we all draw back and say, well, that was a job well done, now let's give up and do something else. No, it's the beginning. It's not the end, but it's a very big signal to the abusive companies that make huge amounts of money that this must stop. The biggest single offender we have found as a company in terms of the number of abusive elephant venues advertised is a US company with an international global reach. It's a company whose annual turnover is around $100,000 million. Of course, not all of that, only a sliver is to do with abusive animal tourism. But you can understand this is the weight and power of an organization with endless resources and reach and skills and advisory input that is a mighty foe. But we don't want to put any business out of action, but we do want to steer the market from all this abuse that they profit from towards ethical. And there's not much time. You know, we can't debate it for decades.
We do have a couple of questions here. Tom Vincel wanted you to touch on how, you may not know how many die a year, mahouts, but we haven't mentioned the exploitation of the mahouts, who are, of course, the caretakers. Why don't you touch on that?
I mean, there's this, we're often challenged, well, what are the poor mahouts going to do when you stop them being allowed to handle the elephants? Well, first of all, let's look at the lifestyle of a mahout. It's pretty awful. It's appalling. Mahouts are generally ill-educated, highly vulnerable, disadvantaged people. They are brought often under false pretenses, thousands of miles from where their families are, to live in utter squalor in mud huts on the edge of villages. They usually get no money, they get no benefits. They're often shoved in front of elephants, which are highly dangerous, particularly elephants that have just been brutalized through Pajan, and they're expected to work with them and to train them. And wholly unsurprisingly, the elephants often attack and kill. We have at Save the Asian Elephants, we have been assiduous in building up schedules of evidence, and we have so far evidence of nearly 800 people, including mahouts and tourists, who've been killed by abused Asian elephants, and of another 1,000 plus who have been catastrophically injured, you know, crushed skulls, broken ribs, ruined internal organs, and so on. And so this is a very dangerous thing. The mahouts resort to alcohol and to drugs, and they're often stoned out of their heads, and they take it all out on the elephants. Now, is that a state of affairs that we wish to encourage and to allow to be continued? I don't think so. These mahouts should be kept in employment if they can, never at the expense of the elephants or other creatures, but they can be set to work in genuine sanctuaries doing sensible jobs of all sorts, such as securing the surroundings, such as ensuring the proper feed of the elephants, many other tasks. You know, but the cry that goes up, let's protect the mahouts, is often no different from that of the mid-Victorian ironmasters and men of commerce in mid-Victorian England, who said that we should continue to keep children down mines and up chimneys because we don't want them losing their jobs. And indeed, those were the sorts of arguments that were deployed in favor of maintaining the slave industry 200 years ago in Britain. You know, those sorts of specious, ridiculous.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but we've seen in other situations where animals are taken out of entertainment. For example, carriage rides here in the US, they've replaced them with electric carts, and the people that drive the carts, They make more money. Their
Yeah.
lives are better. They're much happier. So
Yeah.
it is a false statement. Absolutely.
Yes, I mean, I went and stayed with some of these mahouts for a couple of days on one of my earlier trips to India. They live a really awful, awful life, utter squalor, no social standing, wholly vulnerable, both to the people who employ them and to the animals that they're meant to be dealing with. Indeed, there's a huge evidence now of a human trafficking to get tourists, to get mahouts across borders, particularly involving Myanmar, to get them into Thailand to tend, supposedly to train and to tend for the elephants. But it's these are ruthless masters who operate them. They're in it for money. They're not in it for social reasons to look after the mahouts. They don't give a damn what happens to them. And they are routinely injured. There's huge amounts of academic and scholarly research about this. It's a very dangerous, miserable, hopeless job, and they should not be sustained in that sort of employment. Far better that they're kept in employment doing respectable, safe, proper things that are not damaging to the creatures.
Well, they wouldn't be taking drugs and things like that if their lives were good. We have another question. Deb Thompson is saying, are elephants allowed to be legally imported in the U.S.? Are they breeding from facilities here? You did touch on the breeding a bit, but
well, sadly, elephants are trafficked legally between different countries, and yes, they are. I'm not an expert on this field, but I know that there are elephants in American zoos, and some of them live pretty awful lives. Let's say, like the ill-named Happy the elephant in the Bronx Zoo in New York. They don't get there, but they're not natural to the US, so it's quite obvious they've been brought into the US from their homes. The elephants, as we know, are highly, highly social beings. They live in large matriarchal dominated herds. They of many generations. They learn from each other. They learn everything from each other and follow it's very touching and deeply moving how they learn and what they learn and how they put it to effect and pass it down and so on. And they're deprived of all of that in captivity. They're so thoughtlessly parked alone without the company of any other creatures of their species in a concrete cell with no natural vegetation or even just concrete floors, absolutely nothing to alleviate the crushing boredom and loneliness. And they live desperately sad lives. I've seen elephants both in the wild and after decades in captivity, and they are two utterly different creatures. It's utterly tragic to see what becomes of them after years and decades of abuse. And so, of course, elephants you see in zoos, they're not there for any purpose, despite what you hear, other than to be screwed for every cent and dollar that is possible. There are very few that are there genuinely for conservation reasons or for research reasons. This is highly specious. It's very, very rare. And again, the evidence is starting to seep out. And if anyone in the zoo industry would like a public debate with me or my colleagues, so some of them are hugely expert about this, then they're very welcome to. We would like the biggest possible audience.
And we would invite them on Unchained TV. We would love to
please
invite them on at any time.
Yes.
That would be wonderful. Yes. And by the way, I just want to jump in here and remind people that you are watching Unchained TV and that you can download the app. Just go to watch.unchainedtv.com. It's totally free. Programming, amazing programming, shows like this. I hope you enjoy this show, but in addition, documentaries, cooking shows, full-length movies, and much, much more. So please download the app and support us. Duncan, we are getting near the end of our time. It's been, it's been very informative speaking with you. And I just want to give you the floor now so you can wrap up with anything you think is pertinent and important that people know now.
Well, thank you so much. And just very briefly, the reason why you providing Save the Asian Elephants with your own evidence of abuses to animals in tourism that you think should be included in this new parliamentary law in the UK, there are 3 real reasons why this can help animals in your country. Firstly, by asserting pressure on the travel industry and others in your country to stop advertising venues there which use unethical tourism practices on animals. Secondly, thereby to encourage such venues to start adopting more humane practices in animal-related tourism. Thirdly, if the legislation proves effective in the UK, interest and pressure will grow for similar measures in the US and in other countries. These are powerful reasons why we must link arms and stand together for the animals. This is not just a law for the UK. Please support Save the Asian Elephants. We need that evidence from you. We will gratefully receive it and incorporate it into our submissions that will go to the UK government to make the fullest, strongest list possible of activities that must be banned from advertising and sale in the UK. And we hope then to do everything we can to help the US and others who want to adopt similar measures in your country and beyond. We desperately need financial help. We have remarkably little money at STAE. Our resources are very slender. We are struggling. We fight very hard every day to bring about the betterment of so many beleaguered species. It started with Asian elephants. It's expanded to every vulnerable species. We've taken on a very, very big exercise and campaign, but we're up for it. And we get very strong support now. We have tens of millions of people backing our petition. I think the last figure was just under 35 million, but that doesn't mean we have much money. So please, if you can help us, we desperately need this to keep going. And please just let us know your experiences. I'm always pleased to hear from anyone, and all my team are. We take no money, but what we say is we do it for nothing, but we do it for everything. And so we do. We think this is a battle that must be enjoined, that must be taken on, must be won. But we need massive public support, both here in the UK and in the US and everywhere. Anyone listening, we urge you to contact us to support us. If you can help us financially, we're immensely grateful. If you can't, we entirely respect that. But you know, we have expenses that are considerable that we have to meet to keep going, and that's why we need your support in that way as well. If you can help us with any media coverage, whether it's the press, the visual and audio media online, it's incredibly important. And I'll just finish by saying, you know, there is one thing above everything that is crucial for the survival of all these ancient species, and without which they have no chance, but with it they really do. That is social media. Yes. It's ironical that these species that go back tens of millions of years, you know, in the case of elephants through mammoths and mastodons, tens and tens of millions of years up till the present day and their precarious state. These ancient creatures now rely for their future prospects and survival on the slender, absolutely of the moment, of the current minute manifestation, which is social media. Their future depends utterly on that, and on groups like ours and people like yourselves to help us. It's that will stand between their extinction or their survival. So thank you very much. Thank you, Lindsay, and I'd be delighted to hear from anyone. Thank you.
Yeah, so we hope you will contact Duncan at savetheasianelephants.org or STAE.org is the website, to be precise. Here, I'll put it up again for us. Thank you, Duncan, for being on. Please keep us posted, and we all can help. Those of you that have gone, have experienced tourism where animals are involved, anybody in that, all the different organizations, please contact Duncan. Let's work together. Let's end this. You have great traction right now, and you just need support. So thank you again for being on, Duncan, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.